Well, good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History, and this is episode or chapter 2 in my Treachery Begets Treason channel series. Uh, I sometimes refer to it as the treasonous cabal. And yesterday in chapter 1, we learned about the Ultra Vires Act and the characteristics or the stipulations of that act. That there was only one concern for the CEO or for the board of directors of these new corporations, and that was to maximize profits, even if it went against public interest. And there was a provision in there you could be fired if you were seen to be acting in the public interest and against the corporate interest. And then the second provision was the immunity, uh, both personally and corporate. The personal liability was that if anyone involved in the corporation, their actions were immunized from either asset seizure in the form of a civil lawsuit and or criminal proceedings. In other words, they were completely immunized. And as far as corporate liability was concerned, if you structured your corporation in such a way that you had subsidiaries of the mother company, you could hide your assets. You could still be sued, but the only assets at risk were the ones that the plaintiff sued again, for example, the mother company. So if you hid all your assets of the mother company and these subsidiaries, the plaintiff wouldn't get very much at all. So you could form as many of these subsidiaries as you wanted in order to hide all your assets. You could also hide your tax liability from the government by forming shell companies, or what they called holding companies. So you could, in theory, have a mother company that was divided into 25 subsidiaries and 25 shell companies, and one company instantly becomes 51 companies. And it's the same board of directors, the same CEO running everything. It looks on paper like it's 51 separate companies, but in actuality, it's the same company. And all the corporations were doing this, major ones. And so this is how you could have 50 to 60 people running all the corporations, the major corporations of the country, which means they're running the US economy because they're the ones contributing all the money to the politicians. That means they're running the government. And of course, FDR, when we left off, FDR had recognized this, called it out. And what we're going to eventually find out is that, unfortunately, by virtue of events outside of his control in some cases, like the Great Depression and World War II, FDR is actually going to make the problem worse. He's going to invite this ultra vires uh, principle, these principles from the private sector into the public sector. As long as there was that wall of separation between private and public, you could make an argument that there was, the private sector was this evil capitalist full of these robber barons, but at least the public sector was working in the public interest. Once that veil is pierced, once there is no wall of separation and ultravirus makes its way into the public sector, now the question is who is looking out for the public interest? Yeah, it turns out nobody was. All right, so we'll get to that. So today, what we're going to look at is in chapter 2 are some of the outcomes of ultravirus, which I don't think are going to be earth shattering. Result number one, corporations did what they were told. They began pursuing raw self interest and the maximization of profits. And this is their, you can point the finger at them and say, tut tut, you should be doing that. But this was their marching order. You could be fired if you didn't pursue the maximization of profits. This was, sometimes when people tell you who they are, you need to believe them. The corporations in their own bylaws, and of course, Congress and the Ultra Vires Act laid it out there for everybody who's cared to see, which was corporations exist for only one purpose, and that is to maximize profits. And of course, included in that is the avoidance of any legal liability. And so when you have permission to act badly, when you are not punished for acting. We're seeing this in real time in some of these largest cities across America where the crime rates are out of control because there's no punishment, right? Uh, Cash bail has been eliminated, so you don't have to have a bail or cash bail. Uh, Many of the prosecutors aren't even charging these what they think are small petty crimes, and so uh, criminals, when they get away with it, will continue to be criminals. In fact, their behavior will accelerate. Um, I remember back in, I think it was the 80s or the 90s, Rudy Giuliani became the mayor of New York City, probably the 90s. And New York City had this terrible reputation for crime, and it was in your face. You couldn't avoid it. If you were driving through New York City, squeegee men would jump out off the curb when you stopped at a red light. They'd want to squeegee your windows. If you said no, they would carjack you or damage your vehicle in some way. But they wanted money, is what they wanted. It was basically extortion. And the squeegee men, in addition to all the other crime in New York City, was just terrorizing the public. I mean, Rudy Giuliani ran for mayor saying, I'm going to get rid of these squeegee men. People laughed and said, there's bigger problems. But, it was amazing. He said, I ascribe to the broken windows theory, which is if you see a small broken window, you fix it and you hold accountable the person or the cause for it being broken. And he says, you do that often enough, and pretty soon the bigger stuff goes away too. You start taking care of the small stuff, the bigger stuff goes away. And sure enough, within, a short time, Rudy Giuliani had New York City cleaned up because he was punishing the evildoers, right? No matter how small the crime. Well, corporate conduct after 1868 became increasingly worse because they could get away with it. And the rationale was, hey, we're just pursuing profits. The bottom line, it's all that matters. Public interest be damned. And so the conduct became more and more harsh as they operated under the organizing principle of the corporation to maximize profits, which means if anyone or anything stands in your way, you crush it. And that is how it went in this period of time. Make my picture a little smaller here so you can see the slide. So what you start to see are, and I've listed just a few risks to these profits that corporations might encounter. For example, a worker who is injured uh, might ask for some sort of settlement, or a worker might ask for a raise. In other words, your labor pool is a risk because they can be hurt, they can be injured, they can quit, they can ask for raises. There's all kinds of problems that come along with human uh, labor, right? The response by the corporation was just to fire them. You cut them loose. We got plenty of immigrants waiting as they flood into America for those jobs. So we have a steady labor supply. So if any of our labor supply currently becomes a problem, we just fire them. How about competition or production costs? The way around that was to form monopolies through vertical and horizontal integration, where you either buy up all your competition or you put them out of business, or you buy up the the supply chain along the way so you own everything. And now, presto, your competition is either gone or eliminated, or that you bought them, and your production costs you control. How about government interference? That's easy. Buy the politician, and bingo, the government interference just goes away magically. Uh, Best example of that was company, the company towns, the company store, and and all that. Where if somebody quit, a wage earner, a worker quit, these monopolists, these corporate owners, got Congress to pass laws saying if you quit, you still own the company store money, or you were behind on your rent, all of which was owned by the company. It was a crime. They'd send out people, Pinkertons or whatever, to find you. You'd be kind of like wanted by the FBI. You could not quit as long as you owed money. And of course, you always owed money because you were paid in scrip, which means you could only buy from the company store. The company store prices were just high enough that you always had to borrow a little bit each time. So you owed money. And that wage slavery kept you literally enslaved. You couldn't quit. It was against the law. And so they virtually, here we just fought a war to end slavery. And these corporatists, these owners of corporations, some people call them robber barons, created a new form of slavery with this ready and willing labor supply that was flooding over from Europe. And you put them in your houses. They had to buy their groceries from your store. You paid them your script. And if they ever tried to quit, you send the Pinkertons out. And now you got the government's blessing on all this because you paid for their campaign. If you have personnel issues such as or costs or political disenfranchisement, uh, all of these sorts of random issues, uh, you could, well, if the adults aren't working out, you hire their kids. Back then, we didn't have any child labor laws. You could hire children and pay them next to nothing, work them forever. And of course, this is a blight on American culture and the future of our country because these kids aren't getting educated. They're being worked to death. You could also hire females and pay them less. It was just very easy to exploit all these people. No, there were no such thing as labor unions. Government was on your side, not theirs. So you could exploit the immigrant. You could exploit the female. The females couldn't vote in those days, so that they're politically disenfranchised. Child labor. Who's going to represent the child? There's no union. They can't vote. Nobody cares. And so everything, all the balance, there was no balance. Everything was on the side of the corporation and the robber baron. Maintaining a workforce, that's obviously concern number one to anybody who runs a corporation is you got to have people to work. And I just described the wage slavery. That's how they maintain their workforce. Uh, Congress passed laws that says you couldn't quit if you owed money. Well, everybody owed money. And that prevented excessive turnover. It kept a stable workforce. How about the means of production costs, work hazards, et cetera, et cetera? There's no such thing as OSHA. So you could exploit these workers by putting them in hazardous and unsafe working conditions. Uh, if it, the means of production costs today would include disposing of pollution or contaminants. Back then, there was no such protection. You could pollute the ground, you could pollute the rivers, pollute the air, pollute the lakes. And of course, you don't care about public interest. You're just trying to dispose of the stuff as cheaply as you can. And so if the people living around in the community get sick, get cancer, die, who cares? You're not supposed to be operating in the public interest anyway. This is all about the interest of the corporation. And if unions did try to come in, organize these workers, which of course they'd find a receptive audience, you turn the Pinkerton gun thugs on them, loose on them. And anyone who tries to organize from within, you use violence against them, send a message. So, and of course, if any of this behavior ever made its way to the courts, the laws on the books at the time favored the corporations. So the courts ruled in favor of the law, which was written by these congressmen who were being paid for by these corporation owners. And so there was no recourse in the courts. There was no recourse in Washington or in the state houses. You were the workers, the American people, the public interest was at the mercy of the corporation. And as I mentioned in chapter 1, there are two perspectives on these corporate owners. Some people viewed them as captains of industry because they did provide jobs. Their money provided for scientific research and development of new products and things of that nature. And in some cases, they gave money. They became philanthropists like Carnegie and Rockefeller, et cetera, et cetera. And that was supposed to counterbalance all these other behaviors that we're talking about. And of course, the negative view of these people was that they were robber barons. They were stealing the labor from these exploited peoples. They were stealing the future of these children that they're forced to work. They were stealing the health of their workers by working them in unsafe work and hazardous working conditions. They were stealing from the American public by working counter to the public interest. I mean, you could go on and on and on. Of course, they were stealing from all of them by underpaying them. So there's the captain of industry perspective, and there's the robber baron perspective. The argument was, if you were one of these corporate owners, is that we are doing what we are mandated to do. We are not to work in the public interest. We don't do public interest. Our number one operating principle is to maximize profits, and the public interest be damned. If it happens to align, so be it. Great. If it doesn't, we're going to choose profits every time. And it's interesting is this fit in very well in the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, with this social Darwinist perspective, which, without getting into it, this is a deep study, social Darwinism, this idea that the fittest survive, this idea of natural selection, where the weak become extinct, the unfit, and the strong survive and evolve into even stronger creatures or whatever. It was understood. This was the beginning of the era of eugenics, which was a big push in America. People don't like this. Is one of those underbelly secrets people don't like to discuss about our history, is that eugenics actually started here in America. It came over from England, but it was really taken to the whole other level here in America. In fact, it's where Germany, when you go spin it forward into the 30s, 40s, it's where Germany learned its practice, which resulted in the Holocaust. You divide your society into the unfit and the fit, and you do everything to promote the fit and to protect the fit, and you let the others, the unfit, perish, or even help them perish by in our case we would try to make them infertile so they couldn't have kids, right? We're trying to make their progeny die out, so to speak. It's a long thing, but this idea that these corporate owners were practicing this principle of maximizing maximizing profits at the expense of the public. Most of the public was viewed by these fit of society as unfit. And if a certain person or group of person is unable to survive in this new competitive atmosphere, this competitive world, and they're losing constantly to people that are smarter, faster, stronger, richer, more powerful, then hey, that's the breaks. That's life. Life isn't fair. It's like the animal kingdom. And this was one of the outcomes of Darwinism itself. If you go back and you research Darwinism, and the whole point of it was to convince man that there was no creative spark from some divine being somewhere that created us for a purpose. We're just animals. We're randomly here. We don't really have any purpose or meaning. There's no meaning to our existence. There was no creation story from the Bible. That was all hocus pocus theory, something to make people feel good about their religion. But it was all a lie. We just evolved over time randomly from different animals or different species. And once that creative divine being was attacked, and that story, the creation story, was attacked, it relegated all of us to this random life, having evolved from these animals. In other words, nobody's special, right? And it's just like the animal kingdom has a pecking order, humanity has a pecking order, and it's competition. You either kill or be killed. You eat or you be eaten, type of a thing. And just like the animal kingdom has people at the animals at the top of the food chain, so too the humanity has the fit the top of the food chain, the unfit are at the bottom of the food chain. And the the idea was if you can, as humanity, as a civilization, root out the unfit, more and more of them, and mate the fit with the fit, you're going to have a elevation of the gene pool. You're going to get rid of the unfit genes, and you're going to have more and more of the fit genes, and the species overall will be better for it. Be stronger, be better, and your civilization will be better. It's what you saw happen in a literal sense in Germany, right? We're going to collect all the unfit, and whereas in America they're trying to encourage infertility and you know abortions and things like this to prevent the unfit from having more unfit babies, etc. We're just going to go out and we're just going to actively kill these people and get rid of them and speed up the whole process. Anyway, uh, Darwinism is a very dark philosophy and at its core. It's very dark. It's anti-God. It's anti purpose or meaning. It's just it gets into and it has been used many, many times to justify either exploitation or outright genocide. It's been the argument for these terrible, terrible injustices perpetrated against the weaker among us, the more vulnerable among us. And this ultra vires mindset fits right in with this social Darwinism that is rapidly spreading in America at this time. And it will eventually manifest itself in the form of eugenics. So it's a philosophy that matches the times, so to speak. So what you start to see in these so-called royal families, these corporate dynasties, is intermarriage between the Rockefeller, progeny and the Carnegie progeny, or all these royal families start merging, kind of like it happened in ancient times with these kings, right? A king of one country's daughter would marry, princess would marry a prince of another king of another country, would form an alliance between the two countries. So these corporate families would merge with other corporate families and merge their corporate stock holdings together, which would cause these two relatively large corporations, but separate entities. Once they merge, they become one humongous conglomerate. And now all of a sudden, instead of having two boards, you have one board. And the shrinkage takes place. FDR was talking about 100 people running the entire U.S. economy, 100 people running the U.S. government. And he was adding up all these different boards, but it would actually get smaller than that, down to 50 or 60 because of these mergers that took place between these royal families. So now the oligarchy is getting smaller. Remember, oligarchies rule by few. And so it starts off with the owners of these big corporations and their boards and their CEOs, etc. But as these mergers take place between these royal families, the oligarchy gets smaller and smaller and smaller, ruled by fewer and fewer and fewer. So between the years 1868 and 1918, roughly, these robber barons, in conjunction with help that they got from Washington, because Washington was essentially on their payroll, created a business model or business vehicle by which they could get fabulously wealthy as they maximized profits, and they were completely immunized from any legal liability. What a life! You do anything you want, and your money buys your ticket to freedom. You got to get out of jail free card because of your family name and the company that your daddy or your grandpa put together. They created a business vehicle which could function completely divorced from any moral value whatsoever. And in fact, it was viewed as you were a chump if morality played any role in your decision making. Well, like, for example, it's one of the reasons why a lot of these other corporate owners were very upset with Henry Ford. Eventually, Henry Ford came out with the $4 I think it was a $4 a day or something. He decided I'm going to cut my workers' work week to 40 hours a week. They're going to work Mondays through Fridays, 8 hours a day, or I think he cut it down to 7 hours, gave him an hour lunch, whatever. And he says, I want you free, and I'm going to increase your pay. He absolutely blew up the model. And his thinking was, and of course, he wasn't completely altruistic in his motives. He's thinking happy people are more productive people at work. So if I pay them more and I work them less, they'll be happy and they'll be more loyal to me, and they won't quit. In fact, I'll never have a problem with trying to keep workers or get workers because people will be lined up trying to get jobs at Ford Motor Company because I pay the best, I work them the least, they have weekends off. So they now have enough money to buy the product that they're making, i.e., these Model Ts, and they can drive them around and park them in their front driveway, and it becomes advertising, free advertising for me and for Ford. More people are going to want those cars because they see their neighbors having them. More people are going to work for me because they see how well I treat the workers. The other people in the club were not happy with Henry Ford when he did that. But anyway, you know, I think it's 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 really instructive for people to understand that these corporate owners, these robber barons or captains of industry, whichever you want to, however you view them, they do not or did not operate by the same moral code as the rest of us. They don't look, they don't believe in religion. So the golden rule means nothing to them. They are not looking out for their fellow man. In fact, their entire operating principle, their mandate, the bylaws of their corporation, the law that they had their puppets in Washington pass said you do not worry about the public interest. You worry about maximizing profits. Money is their moral code. What's good for the public is not even in their it's not in their vocabulary. It's not in their mindset at all. So trying to guilt these corporate owners into doing the right thing for their community or doing the right thing for their employees, wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. They only understood the bottom line, profit. That's it. And of course, they're immunized from any legal liabilities, so they could do whatever they wanted in the pursuit of profits and not worried about being hauled into court. What? Wow. I mean, you can just see where this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well. Um, all right. So the end result of this was these monopolies, inevitably. It's the greed of, I have this railroad, but I have to pay for the steel to make the rails, to make my cars, et cetera, et cetera. What if I own the steel company that produced the steel that I have to purchase? Now I own, you know, the supply chain, everything that I need, the wood for my box cars, the steel for my rails, the oil for my engines. What if I own the oil company? What if I own the steel company? What if I own the lumber mill? Now I control all of my costs, all of my expenses, and I can sell the surplus of that to my competitors. And in addition to supplying what I need, I can also make profit off of that, in addition to cutting my costs for my railroad and making more money on my. Anyway, these companies start swallowing up their competitors, start swallowing up their supply chain, and the companies got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they create these monopolies. Monopoly means total absolute control. That's the essence of maximizing your profits. You have to have total absolute control over your supply chain, total absolute control over your workforce, total absolute control over your competition, total absolute control over the politicians in Washington, the judges, total absolute control. And once you achieve that, you can write your own check. It's like you've become the Department of the Treasury. You're printing your own money. And you enforce that with these Pinkerton gun thugs. You enforce that with violence. And of course, you have immunization from any legal liability, so they can do what they want. Your Pinkerton gun thugs are your own little police force, your own little army. It goes back to like in England and in the days of the British East India Company. The British East India Company basically controlled the entire empire. The king, the queen, they did whatever the British East India Company told them, right? The company had its own army, which was bigger than England's army. They made more money. They brought in more money than the crown. The British East India Company ran the British Empire. That's what these monopolies are doing. They have the military on their side because they have the president. The president is the commander in chief. Well, the president is beholden to these monopolists. And so uh, he's going to do their bidding. The courts are on their side. The legislature's on their side. It's why they got, Congress to write the Ultra Vires Act to begin with. Everybody's on their side. Just to give you a little idea about the mindset of these people, this is in their own words. Okay. Again, uh, this is from the perspective of the robber barons. And boy, I'll tell you, they kind of make a case for the robber baron perspective by the virtue of their own words. Cornelius Vanderbilt says, "What do I care about the law? I've got the power." No kid. Jay Gould says, "I can hire half of the working class to kill the other half." And he was right. Rudyard Kipling in White Man's Burden said, "Do what is necessary." Even in spite of the inevitable public criticism, he says, "Do what is necessary to gain the control of resources over the quote, half devils and half children." This is that social Darwinism, the fit and the unfit. You know, you had the fit looking down their noses at the workers who are producing all this wealth for them, calling them half devils and half children. Rudyard Kipling just gave voice to that. This is the uh, perspective in America at this time, which gave rise to this new elite class of people. Remember, this whole point of this is I'm trying to steer you in the direction, help you understand where this deep state came from. It started after the Civil War with this Ultra Vires Act, which unleashed this pent up demand for power and control, absolute control over everybody and everything. And they're completely unaccountable. They're hidden behind the veneer of corporate immunization and anonymity of being uh, this corporate owner who really is, he's kind of an absentee owner. The CEO runs the corporation, the board runs the corporation. He's off on some golf course or some island that he owns somewhere, and everyone's doing his bidding. And meanwhile, he and his friends, the other people in this elite club, are running the country. They own the politicians, they own the courts, they control the military, they control their own police, private police forces. They they have all the money, they have all the power. Then they're completely unaccountable. You don't vote for them, they don't stand for election. The public, in many cases, don't even know they exist, other than the fact that the Henry Ford name is on the car that they drive, or Rockefeller, uh, you know, Carnegie, all these big names are splashed on buildings and businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But they become so big, they're almost like mythic creatures. And they're the ones running everything. And they create these foundations that they funnel money into to run different parts of our society, whether it be healthcare, you know, look at the Rockefeller Foundation, look at the Ford Foundation, look at the Bill Gates Foundation, how involved they are in healthcare, uh, education, uh, propagandizing the future, the younger generations. I mean, they're smart. They create these foundations, these boards to get into the arts, into education, into philanthropy, into healthcare, into finance, and then they just like uh, uh, like an octopus with their 8 arms, they just consolidate control over everything. Politicians are just one of those arms, one of those entities controlled by one of those arms, in addition to all the other things they control. This is the beginning, the deep state. Okay, there's going to be a response. Every action has a reaction, right? So there's going to be a response to that. We'll look at that in chapter 3 as we get into the efforts to counterbalance this runaway freight train that these robber barons represent. And we'll get into that in chapter 3. Until then, hope everybody has a blessed day. Thank you.